Hi everyone, Marc Lowe here in Tokyo, my apartment, and I haven't done a reading series video in a while, which is where I read fiction. Sometimes it's been my own, but usually it's, not usually, but it's mine or someone's fiction. And tonight I'm going to do Brian Evenson. I'm drinking coffee. It's nighttime, and this is just my habit. I do this. So, actually, I had said months and months ago that eventually I was going to do a Brian Evenson reading as part of my reading series. And I kind of, I stopped doing the reading series for a while. I just got busy doing other things. And I read some of my own things. And there were some others that I was planning to do as well. But anyway, I'm now back in my teaching mode. I'm teaching several classes a week, every day of the week at a different university almost. And of those classes, I teach some literature classes, and those tend to be like a single author. And I've done Brian Evenson. I did Fugue State, his collection Fugue State. I did it here in Tokyo 1 year. But at another university from where I taught Fugue State, and this is not a class on Brian Evenson, but I'm doing a creative writing class. And I often share Evenson's work in my creative writing classes. And I used to read Wind Eye, which is an earlier story than this one I'm going to read. But later, I believe, than Fugue State. Fugue State was written, or was published rather, the year, maybe the first or maybe it was the second year of two that I was at Brown University. Now, give a little bit of background here. Excuse me, I'm drinking coffee. I just, this, right? It's coffee. Actually, Coffee House Press publishes Brian Evenson's book. There you go. Right? So this is ode to Coffee House Press here. It's nice coffee. So what I want to say is I studied at Brown University from 2008 until 2010. The following year I returned to Japan and have been here ever since. My own history goes back, I've lived here before and studied Japanese literature and all that kind of thing. But 28 to 2010, I was in Providence, Rhode Island, studying at Brown in the literary arts program, doing fiction writing. I had been writing and publishing short stories, and I also wrote some longer things, although mostly unpublished, because I didn't really, kind of like with music, I just, that part of it just didn't appeal to me, and I wasn't good at it, but I was constantly writing, kind of like I'm constantly making music. Now, very much the same personality, same person. I didn't publish that much. I published a lot of short things on various like online journals and some print journals. And I had a chapbook published, which I read on my page, Tour of Beaujardin. Anyway, let me give a little personal background how I came about Brian Evenson's writing and my introduction to him. Then talk about how I studied at Brown, talk a little bit about Brian Evenson and who he is and what he writes. I'm going to read this story, which I haven't mentioned the title yet. It'll be on the YouTube page. And then at the end, after I've read it, I'm going to do a little analysis of it. Just briefly getting back to what I was saying, in my creative writing class now, because I'm jumping into different topics, which I often do in class too, I shared this story. And like I said before, I was, in previous years, I shared Wind Eye, and that was Pen America. And that went offline, it seems, or I didn't check this year, today, or this year, but it was offline when I had checked it. And so I stopped, obviously, I didn't, unless I have the paper book to share, like I have Fugue State and some of his other works in paper or online on my hard drive, I mean. But there's a newer story from a newer collection which deals with, and this story in particular I'm going to read, deals with AI or robots kind of thing. And this one's online. It's a nocontactmag.com, Never Little, Never Grown. And I also have actually the book that this is included in. I have a copy of that, electronic copy of that. So I decided to share this. What I do is in my creative writing classes is I give my students every week, tends to be every week or most weeks, we read something, and then that sort of inspires the prompt that I will give them to give them an idea for writing. It's totally free and open, but like for this one, I say, what's the genre do you think? And then I have them write a story in this genre, so we'll talk about it. I'll be reading it and talking about it soon. Go back, again, jumping. My personal story, how I encountered Brian Evenson, and this will also, I'll give some background on his work and writing, what he does to the best of my knowledge. I'm actually not up to the very, very, very latest. I kind of hear things and see things, and I'm actually connected on his SNS. I can see what he's doing, but kind of, publicly, I mean. And from time to time, like, we've had message exchanges about things. And last year, I think it was when I taught the course on Evenson and I did Fugue State, I asked him, can I interview you, do a video, Zoom. He's at Cal Arts in California, US, and I was here in Tokyo in the same room that I'm in now, with a different background because it was facing the other wall. And I put that on my YouTube page. Eventually he agreed that I could share it publicly, not only for my students, but for whoever. And so that interview is under the interviews folder here. I first encountered Brian Evenson's work. The first thing I read of his was a collection of short stories entitled not The Wavering Knife. Yes, The Wavering Knife. Not The Wavering Knife. Yes, The Wavering Knife. The Wavering Knife by Fiction Collective 2, or FC2, was the publisher for that. It's a small publisher in the US that tends to favor experimental fiction. I was actually at a Borders bookstore in the US years and years ago. It was between living in Japan, living in the US. I kind of went back and forth. And I was working, I was in Colorado, actually. I graduated with a Master of Arts, MA, in literature, Japanese literature from U of Colorado in Boulder. Lived in Japan for 2 years, in Hiroshima after that, and then went back to the US. And then after that, that's when I discovered his work. And later ended up studying at Brown because I applied and wanted to work with them and was lucky enough to have the chance. So, but The Wavering Knife was at a Borders, it's like right Barnes & Noble Borders chain bookstore. Just happened to be on the shelf, even though it's a small publisher, it was there, and it was like, oh, looks cool. It's like a red cover with these like knives and weird things on it. And I just picked it up and started reading the first story, which I believe is called White Square. And it's like a detective, existential detective, Robbe-Grillet meets Paul Auster's New York trilogy, City of Glass, which also, by the way, I now teach pretty regularly to my university students, meets Borges, this kind of what Merivale and Sweeney, the scholars who put together this volume that I sometimes reference, also an academic volume of essays about what they call the metaphysical detective story or novel. I mean, this story would have fit perfectly in that whole thing. So I loved it. And I mean, because this is like one genre. I like also Kobo Abe Kobo in Japanese, wrote in this style some stories, some novels actually. He did Moetsukita Chizu, which is the Man Without a Map, or the Ruin Map, and even Boxman and some of the other things, Hako Toko and things, have like elements of the mystery of the detective novel. But again, they tend to deal with identity in some way, and mysteries that cannot be solved, like the human mystery of life. Who are we? What are we? And actually, that's a theme here too, but it's coming from a different angle. We'll get there. So, or I'll get there. So, I discovered this anyway. I read I read White Square and just loved the story so much. I could read that actually as part of this too, but I'm going to read a newer one. I recommend White Square if you like this genre. Anyway, and then I bought the book and I brought it home and I read it. And some of the other stories were a bit more graphic, violent, horrific, but also very funny. Like there's like this dark, biting sense of humor and irony to it that I loved. Reminded me of like Kafka and Beckett. And we talked about that when we had our interview. I asked him about that. And he said, yeah, I mean, those are like two of his big influences, especially Kafka was like number one. And for me too, I've always loved Kafka. Starting with the Metamorphosis, which I read in like high school or middle school. I think it was high school. And then I bought the collected, the Muir, M-U-I-R translations, and off we went. And when I interviewed Brian Evenson on the page, you can go and look at that. He says something similar, like I think his father read it to him, and there was something strange about it and different about it that opened up new kind of doors for him, he said, like a new way of viewing fiction and perhaps reality itself kind of thing, right? So this kind of thing. So getting back to it. So I really love The Wavering Knife, and then I started reading other things. There's Altman's Tongue. I was going to say, it's not Altman's Tongue, it was The Wavering Knife. I said, it's not Wavering Knife. Yes, it is. Altman's Tongue was his first collection of stories. There's a whole backstory about this, that he was kicked out of essentially he was at Brigham Young, right, which is Mormon school, Mormon backed, and so he came from sort of that background and family, and he was excommunicated basically for the violence in the book. Someone made a stink over it, and it got up to the top level, and they gave him trouble, and he was like, well, this is freedom of speech, this is freedom of writers or art is open and free. And I mean, the thing about it that I recall, and Brian, if you're watching this, and maybe later you can tell me if I'm mistaken, but it's like, the characters that he wrote in Altman's Tongue, and you get this in Wavering Knife too, in some of the stories, they're kind of empty up here, and they're kind of like, there's, like I say, a dark, biting humor, and if you get it, you get it. And it's like, well, these idiots, and they're committing violent acts, but they're doing so stupidly and for stupid reasons. And that could be a commentary on many things. And so Evenson's work, beyond those works and getting later, I mean, he's written so much. Other things that are kind of detective-esque. There's the story of this cult he wrote where people are cutting their limbs off, or they start with cutting off digits and more, and then more and more and more. The more you kind of cut, the higher your ranking is in this kind of cult thing. It's this kind of really ridiculous but really grotesque and kind of funny, but also really uncomfortable sort of, thing. And that also has a kind of detective feel to it. Klein, I think, was the protagonist's name. I haven't read it in years, but I loved it. Baby Leg was this novella he published. I remember when I was at Brown, that was like, try to get our hands on this thing. It was like, the band Coil I liked, right? You try to get your limited edition CD, buy it now or you'll never see it again. It was like in a limited run kind of thing. And so his fans, including myself, trying to buy this. And it does a lot with limbs and legs and arms and things like this. This story that I'm going to read is not about that at all. And it's actually not a horror story. I wouldn't call it quite. It has a dark aspect to it and an existential question at its heart, I think. Anyway, that's my interpretation. And that's, after I read it, I'll give my take on it, my analysis or my thoughts on it. But anyway, so Evenson, Dark Property, I was thinking with the name Dark. I said it's dark. Dark Property was another one, a novella. He was also has his early to mid sort of work seems to feel that it has a Cormac McCarthy influence at times. I know he was a fan of Blood Meridian and all those, some of the earlier ones, I think, All the Pretty Horses maybe, and I could ask him again, if I have a chance to interview him again or talk to him again about this. But so Cormac McCarthy and the language with these kind of archaic words that are not used frequently anymore, that come from biblical language or times, or Evenson at one point in his writing career was sort of doing this like McCarthy does or did. I was teaching Paul McCarthy's The Road. Paul McCarthy, I'm saying, oh my God, Cormac McCarthy, and I'm thinking Paul McCartney of the Beatles and Cormac McCarthy. That's really embarrassing. Cormac McCarthy's The Road, and the year I was teaching it, he died, and this happened also with, this has nothing to do with Brian Evenson. Evenson's alive and well. And also this happened with Paul Auster, but I mean, it was like the second or third year in a row, at least, maybe fourth year in a row or something. I was teaching Auster when he died of cancer last year, but, New York Trilogy and other things I've taught of Auster's. But anyway, Auster, all the way, by the way, this connects with Brian Evenson at Brown, because when I was at Brown, I haven't gotten that part of the story yet. I ended up studying with him at Brown for the literary arts degree, Master of Fine Arts in fiction writing in my case, not poetry, although I sometimes do write poems, and after that I start writing lyrics, right? Because I started doing music again. But I was talking about Paul Auster, right? He came to visit us at Brown, and there was a Writers on Writing seminar program thing, and they would come, and famous authors would come and read, and then we would have our own. It would be like in the main hall for the public or for people at Brown, or for the wider literary community. People from, literature department, not necessarily our tiny little literary arts, creative writing department. And then for the undergraduates, but then for the graduates, especially, it was a very small, close-knit group. We could talk to the authors and just have a close session, And so, yeah, anyway, Auster came to that once. As well as many other incredible authors. Anyway, getting back to Brian Evenson, I did a talk on Paul Auster right after he passed away on this page too. You can find that here too. It's not under reading series, but it's just under talks. But so in 2008, I don't remember, if it was 7 or 8, whatever, I was accepted to the program and was lucky enough to work with Brian Evenson, so I got to know him a little bit. I mean, I was a student, he was a teacher kind of thing, that kind of relationship, but he's really casual and, call me Brian, and just really nice guy and easy to talk to and get along with, and he's just cool. And I said this in the interview, right? And he showed this on the screen at the end. I told my students today about this too. I just said, how can you not say this? He's a fan of, Edgar Allan Poe, right? The great Gothic horror writer, also wrote poetry and other things too. But so he has a bobblehead, those things where the head, you go bong and the head kind of shakes around. He's got a Poe bobblehead, or he had one in his office. So that's kind of cool. Just a really nice, funny, cool guy, and that dark sense of humor when you talk to him and you meet him. At least I haven't met him face to face in years, though we did the online interview, but had that kind of aspect to him. This is very something like a subtle humor. It's like he's grinning without showing it on his face when he's talking to you. And if you kind of read between the lines, you can kind of catch that he's sort of like grinning or smirking at times, maybe. He's a very smart guy and very funny and very cool and very nice, and he's just cool. So anyway, I studied with him for 2 years. I actually did as graduates, we could do like our own, make your own, topic kind of one-on-one thing, which was really cool. So in my case, I did like detective or existential detective. I mean, that whole, right, the White Square, the first story of his I read, which was in that genre, you could say. So we did that together, and I don't remember exactly what we read, but he recommended things, and some things I wanted to read. I had already read the Auster trilogy, and I had already read Abbe Kobo and Alain Robbe-Grillet, a lot of Alain Robbe-Grillet, like the early erasers and stuff. Or Le Voyeur, and all these, not of utter destruction is beauty, which is David Bowie. David Bowie, I should say for another talk, really, because I have a million things I could say here. I'm doing a class on Bowie and dystopia this semester. I want to talk about that, but that's a separate talk, okay? And what's going on in America and all this stuff. So I've got a lot more to say, but let's get back to Brian Evenson. So I've talked a little bit about, right? So I graduated in 2010. I came back to Japan in 2011. I've been here ever since. I haven't met Brian in person, face-to-face, since that time. We had Corona, we had COVID, all kinds of things. But I started teaching more literature classes once after coming to Tokyo in 2019. COVID, see, I'm jumping ahead. I mean, I was in Fukuoka for 2011 for 8 years. I came to Tokyo in 2019, then COVID, all that stuff. And in Tokyo, from 2020 onward, I started teaching more literature classes. Again, I had started originally in 2011 teaching in the literature department, Kyushu University, only for 2 years, though. I was basically teaching non-creative writing. I was teaching academic writing. And I had like one creative writing class I created with like 2 or 3 students. It was always really tiny. But in Tokyo, I started teaching literature again, more and more. And now the bulk of my classes, more than half of the classes I teach, I guess, something like that, or literature, or, something around literature, or something around something topic related, liberal arts topic related. So a couple years back, as I said, I decided to teach Fugue State, and then we did the interview, maybe last year, the year before, academic year. And like I say, I was start doing creative writing classes in Tokyo. They asked me, one university asked me, I'm doing for both. And then another university I do in the summer at a different university. It's an all-girls university, and they have a special course on creative writing that I teach. So getting back to my course, I mentioned this earlier, week by week, we read something, and then I create a prompt, something for students to write about. And like we do haiku one week, I do music, lyrics, and I play, like I always do like Space Oddity, and then I do like Ua, which is Japanese artist, but singing in English, and these kinds of things. And like, let's see if we can create lyrics without music, right? Or haiku in English. That's the poetry kind of side, but then fiction, I introduce different styles. For flash fiction or microfiction, I start with the Hemingway, the 6th word. It's attributed to Hemingway, whether or not he wrote it. For sale, baby shoes never worn. 6 words. Is this a story or not? See. Anyway, this last week and today, actually, earlier today. I've done this many times, but I read this story that I'm going to read. Never Little, Never Grown. Yeah, make sure I got the title right. Never Little, Never Grown. Now, this story, I asked the students, what do you think the genre is? And they get it. And I'm assuming that people coming to this have never read it, although maybe some have, if you're a fan of Evenson, and that's why you're coming here and you've read it before. I'm going to do a reading of it in my own dramatic way, and then, like I say, kind of analyze or interpret, give my words about this. And I've read this a number of times, and actually, I had some further thoughts about it actually this time around. So, and also putting it in context of today, like rather than last year or whatever, like when I read it before. This is a fairly recent story. It's maybe a year old or less than a year or something. I think the collection was published last year, I believe. I think that's right. And my concept of time has shifted so much. It's like it could have been 2 years ago. I'm thinking it's last year. I would have to look that up, but it's fairly recent, and it deals with, I'll read it and I won't say, but I'll talk about it later. Here's what No Contact Mag says. Brian Evenson is the author of a dozen books of fiction. Most recently, the story collection Song for the Unraveling of the World, Coffee House Press. I mentioned Coffee House Press, 2019. So that's before this collection came out, which is more recent. Okay, let's see what else they say. Which won the Shirley Jackson Award. I'm teaching Shirley Jackson this semester. I just did the lottery, which everyone knows maybe. At least most Americans read that story. But I'm actually doing a collection of hers called Dark Tales, which is not the usual thing. And then next semester, I'm going to do her final novel. We All Live in the Castle. The Shirley Jackson Award. He was also a finalist for the World Fantasy Award. Other recent books include Collapse of Horses, 2016, and The Warren, which is a tour book. And that's another thing. He sometimes writes under another name, doing kind of like science fiction fantasy. And this kind of falls a little bit in that, but it's Brian Evenson. But he does for tour, which is like a, sci-fi fantasy. Brian Evenson, another thing I didn't say about him, we talked about this a lot in the interview, is that he's a literary writer. He's very philosophical. He writes horror, right? And other kind of genre, right? It's like he does genre writing, but it's very literary in its approach, I would say. But then he does the genre stuff for tour. But I think, even if you read that, you're going to find that it's also at times philosophical or whatever. He did I think the Alien series, they asked him to write books for this series. That it's like a what do you call it? Not a chain store, but like a franchise. I was thinking McDonald's. It's a franchise, right? Like the Aliens franchise. But then he would jump in, write the book, and publish B.K. Evenson instead of Brian Evenson. He didn't really change his name that much, huh? But it's, it's separate. It's like Marc Lowe and This Dark Shroud or something. For my music, right? Change the name. Okay, so The Warren is tour. 2016, his novel Last Days won the American Library Association's RUSA Award for Best Horror Novel. Last Days, 2009. That was the one with Klein and the detectives and the cult of chopping off the limbs. And he actually has a follow-up to that coming out, or maybe it's out. Maybe I missed it. It's coming out, I think, or it's out soon. I think it might be even next year. I think he finished writing it, and it's due to be published. His novel, The Open Curtain, was a finalist for the Edgar Award and an International Horror Guild Award. His 2003 collection, The Wavering Knife, that's the one that I read first, from 2003 it was published, won the IHG Award for Best Story Collection, and that was FC2. His new book of stories, The Glassy Burning Floor of Hell, will be published in 2021. So this is again, right? And then this story was published again, if memory serves, last year, I think 2023 or 24, the collection that this story forms a part of. So he is the recipient of 3 O. Henry Prizes, an NEA Fellowship, and a Guggenheim Award. His work has been translated into more than a dozen languages, including Japanese, Shibata Sensei, okay? Translate him. He also translates, he does a Stephen Milhauser, which I teach Stephen Milhauser too. Another postmodern author. I could do Stephen Milhauser reading at some point. Milhauser, Auster, Evenson. Auster's not translated, I don't think, by Shibata, but anyway. So his work's been translated into more than a dozen languages, maybe more than that even now. More than a dozen. It was a dozen. It was more than a dozen, though. It's more than a dozen, maybe. He lives in Los Angeles, and he teaches in the Critical Studies program at Cal Arts, which I think is still true. When I interviewed him, he had the Cal Arts thing in the background in his office. I believe he's in Europe now. Anyway, what else to say about him? He's done screenwriting too, for like a TV series, and I've never seen it. And I don't have a TV, and I don't live in the U.S., and so that's kind of outside my range of, something I would catch. But I do know about that. So he's really involved in all these things. I also want to mention one other thing is that one thing I know about him is that in addition to, if I'm not mistaken, he has 2 PhDs, and one is in literature and the other is in continental philosophy, I believe. So when I analyze this, I'm going to talk about how this registered with me And with my background in philosophy, the kind of philosophy that I'm sort of now reading or thinking about that connects, I think, but is not necessarily what Brian Evenson was thinking about, because he has a different background in that sense, more Western, and mine tends to be a little bit more Eastern, because I'm going to talk about J. Krishnamurti and memory. And of course, like memory is like a basic thing, right? That a topic is important, like identity, or right, in Kafka, we have identity. We have identity in lots and lots and lots and lots of authors. Some of them are European, some of them are not, right? And it's so on. Paul Auster and New York Trilogy is all about identity. I'm going to read. All right. And then that's what I'll say about Brian Evenson. 30 minutes. I gave the personal side and spoke a bit about his background, who he is, what he writes, what he does, and his bobblehead in his office of Edgar Allan Poe bobblehead. I'm going to read this story, Never Little, Never Grown, and it's in No Contact magazine online, unless it goes down, like maybe I'm causing these things to go offline or something by reading them publicly. I don't know. I hope not, but right now it's still online. So, and it's also in Good Night, Sleep Tight is the actually the title story from that is also fantastic, and I could have read that, but again, this one's online and I read it with my students. It's fresh in my mind. Maybe I'll do another one. Maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll do White Square. It just depends how much energy, motivation, and time I have. I might do another reading, but let's do for today, Never Little, Never Grown. Okay, Never Little, Never Grown by Brian Evenson. Mother, he asked, what was I like when I was little? You were never little, the woman said. Never, he said. She just nodded. When I was young, then he said. You were never young, said the woman. She wouldn't meet his gaze, perhaps because, once she did, he would be able to tell if she was dissembling. That was one of his gifts. Or perhaps you always were, and still are, she added. But which was it? Were these two very different things? To be never young and to be always young. He had been taught they were, even if he could not remember where and when he'd been taught that. He just knew. But he had also been taught that every living creature had an immature state. That every living creature began young and, as time went on, became old. Now, he knew this was true of every living creature but one, himself. Either that or his mother was lying to him. But why should she lie? She was, after all, his mother. In the morning, he woke her at the prescribed time. He carried her to the kitchen and placed her in the special chair there, strapping her in so she would not fall out. She smiled vaguely around her as he secured her, never looking quite at him. She kept smiling as he prepared breakfast for her, opening 2 packets of powder and mixing them with water collected overnight from a distiller. And then he dolloped the paste on a plate and shaped it to look vaguely like one of the pictures of food she had shown him. When he was done, he placed it before her. Thank you, she said. She was polite like that. He stood watching her eat, and when she was done, cleared the plate away, rubbing it clean with a handful of sand taken from the floor of the shelter. Where shall we go today? She asked. Wherever you'd like, he said. She nodded. The drift, she said. That's a capital D. I'd like to see it at least once more before the end. The end of what? He asked. For a brief moment she glanced directly at him, and he saw in her face a mixture of surprise and pain. Quickly she hid it, looking away. I'd forgotten, she said. We cleared you a few days ago. Cleared me? Never mind, she said. Well, shall we go? He gathered the rest of the water from the distiller to take with him. He fetched a hat for her, and he helped her affix it firmly onto her head, tightening the strap around her chin. Then he lifted the chair with her in it and slotted the legs into his shoulder grooves just where it was meant to go. Fast or slow? He asked. Chef's choice, she said. What? He asked, surprised. He looked around for a chef, but as usual, for as long as he could remember, there was only the 2 of them. You've forgotten that too, of course, she said. My apologies. There's no chef. It used to be a little joke between us. Why can't I remember, he asked. Never mind, she said. It just means that I leave it to you to decide. Being able to decide meant he could sometimes be fast and sometimes slow. He could move more quickly through the barren parts than slower in places where there was something to see. He ran most of the way until they neared the crashed site. Then he slowed and walked, curious to see how the site had changed. The last time he remembered being there had been a dark gouge in the dirt. Shards of blackened ceramics scattered about, twisted bits of metal, a scorched smell. Now, all of this was hidden, overgrown with thick, tangled vegetation. It was confusing and impossible. How long has it been since we were here, he asked. A few days, she said. It doesn't, he began, but she reached over, caressed the top of his head. You're remembering an earlier time, she said, much, much earlier. You've forgotten everything that came between. Why, he asked. Well, it was what you wanted, she said. Why did I? He asked. Let's continue on, she said. We can talk more once we're at the drift. The drift, too, looked different than the last time he remembered seeing it. The place where they had previously sat to observe had eroded and fallen into the slurry of mud below. The interconnected flowing islands of plant matter, once alive and vibrant, were now dead and dying, and the mud had thickened enough that the movement of the islands had slowed to next to nothing. I don't understand what's happening, he said. He had taken her chair from his shoulder and placed it near the new edge, first stamping on the ground to make sure it was stable and wouldn't crumble away. Now he sat beside her, looming over her, both of them looking out. She seemed not to have heard him. I don't, he began again, but when she lifted a hand and turned slightly toward him, he stopped speaking. Do you remember yesterday, she asked. Yesterday, he said, of course. Do you remember asking me why I looked so much older, and how was it possible I had aged so much overnight? How you were surprised I could no longer walk? Yes, he said. You explained it happened that way with you, but that it wouldn't with me. Did you understand what I meant? No. She turned further and looked straight at his face. He could tell by tiny movements around her eyes and mouth that she was planning to tell him the truth. Between yesterday and what was for you the day before yesterday, many years passed. Why? Because you were cleared. Cleared? She nodded. You learned something you didn't want to know, and you begged me to help you forget it. I did. You did. You turned and looked out at the floating islands of rotting vegetation, swaying gently in mud and slime. What did I not want to know, he asked. Are you sure you want me to tell you? She asked. I won't tell you unless you're sure you want to know. He felt irritated. How can I know if I want you to tell me if I don't know what it is? She reached out and touched his arm again. When you learned it before, you wanted to forget it. Maybe this time will be different. From the others? Well, why would it be? Others, he said. How many times have I learned and then asked to forget it? A few hundred, she said. Maybe a few more than that. How's that possible? She shrugged. I'm tired, she said. Take me back. At the shelter, he lifted her out of the chair and onto the cot. Her face had taken on a grayish cast. She offered a loose smile, as if her face had become boneless. I don't have much time left, she said. Yeah. He could tell from her face that she believed this. But what did she mean? If he saw enough of her face, he could tell if she was lying or telling the truth, but not always how to interpret the lies or the truth. Time, he asked. If one day you come to wake me, she said, and you find me unable to awaken, open the locker beside my cot. Inside are instructions. Read and follow them. All right, he said. Should I read them now? No, she said. Not until I'm unable to awaken. He turned and turned to leave the room. "Stay a little," she said. "Sit beside me while I fall asleep." "All right," he said. It didn't matter to him if he rested here, near her, or elsewhere, since he didn't need to sleep. That was one of the ways in which they were different, but there were still things he wanted to ask her. "Are there other people?" he asked. She yawned. "Beside me?" she asked. "Besides, us," he said. "Yes," she said. "Only not here. You'll probably never see another person besides me." He thought about this, but he didn't know what, having been told this, he should ask next. "Can I ask one other thing?" "One more," she said, "and then let me sleep." "Are you really my mother?" he asked. For a long time she was silent. Finally, she said, "I'm as close to a mother as you'll ever have. You must be satisfied with that." "What am I?" he said. "Why do you and I look so different?" "Tomorrow," she said, gently, and he let her sleep. In the morning, he couldn't wake her. No matter what he did, he picked her up anyway, carried her to the chair, and he strapped her in. She slumped there, her head tilted to one side. "Mother," he called. "Wake up, Mother." He kept expecting her to wake up. At what point, he wondered, would he know for certain he could never wake her up? At what point should he read the instructions she had left? Perhaps that note would tell him how to go about waking her up. He tried for a while more. He mixed the powder, water, and gave the paste the shape of a food that she liked and placed the plate before her. He spooned it into her mouth, but it wouldn't stay in. He asked her questions, but she didn't answer. Finally, he went and he opened the locker. "If you're reading this," the note began, "it means that I am dead. Now you are alone in the world. You discovered I would die and that you could not. And once you realized my death was approaching, you did not want to know that I would die. For though your mind is artificial, it is as finely formed and as capable of suffering as our organic ones. The nature of the symbiotic attachment they programmed into you has made the realization that our connection will end profoundly painful. You wanted this pain to end. Your mind is such that forgetting can be carefully controlled and targeted. For several years, every few days, I've been clearing the days that came before so as to preserve you." It went on. He didn't understand it exactly, but he understood the gist of it. He was alone now. His mother, if mother was the right word, had abandoned him. There was, with the letter, a small gleaming object. "If you choose to slot this," the note told him, "you will remember every single thing that you'd chosen to forget." He buried her, as her instructions told him to do. He did not understand why he should do this rather than just dropping her into the drift to float back and forth among the rotting islands, but she wanted to be buried, so he buried her. And then he came back to the shelter. He looked at the gleaming object, right? Did he want to remember? He didn't know. But he was also unsure how he would go on in the state of not knowing that he was in now. How could he go on as only part of himself? Then again, if he had wanted to forget what he had learned, not just once, but several hundred times, perhaps he wouldn't be able to continue in a state of knowing either. What else, in addition to the fact of his mother's mortality, had he chosen to forget? He knew now that she was dead, but he could survive the loss of her, partly because he didn't feel he knew her very well. To him, it felt as though he had only known her for a few days. If he remembered her fully, remembered everything about what she had meant to him, about how they were connected, would it become unbearable? And so he went on as usual, each morning, wondering if today would be the day he would choose to remember. But as time went on, and as he spent his days examining the subtle changes of the crashed site, sitting back and watching the slow back and forth drift of the floating islands, each set of memories building on the others that had come before. His perception of the changes of each place and of each object became interlaced. The lack he had felt previously in himself began to be latticed over and diminished by the interconnections of these more recent memories. And finally, after many, many days, the lack was all but gone. He returned the shining object to the locker unused. He did not forget the woman's grave because he could not forget without the woman's help. But he had so many other memories that both it and she did not occupy his attention. He was not unhappy, alone in this place, going on and on as he always had, or at least as he always had as far back as he could remember. Growing no older, never changing, but finally somehow feeling more or less whole. Though every once in a while he would still find himself thinking, who was that woman? Was she really my mother? Who did I used to be? He came to think of the few days he could remember with the woman as being his childhood, even if he had been no smaller than he was now. I'm an adult now, he told himself. And sometimes on the right days, when the crash site offered a new tendril of vine, or when one of the floating islands in the drift finally collapsed before his eyes, he could actually believe it. And that's where the story ends. And I talked with my students about it. I asked them for the reactions. And they're young, so they're not super well read, but and they're reading in a foreign language, English second language. They asked, one of the first questions I got was, and this from a very bright kind of student said, why did he return the gleaming object unused to the locker? Why didn't he want to recall the memories? Well, this is how I put it. This is I'll start my kind of analysis here. It's like a selective amnesia, isn't it? And going back to Paul Auster, I actually mentioned this in class today too, because the other day, teaching the Red Notebook, which is Auster, an early collection of, I wouldn't call them essays, they're like these vignettes, and they're published as nonfiction, but there are bits that are hard for students to swallow and for readers, because they kind of, I talk about Rashomon effect and all these things, which I could go into here, but then it's going to get too much. But there was a story we read recently, yesterday, about an event that could be considered traumatic, but the way it was related, second-hand, third-hand, was that Auster was telling the story, right? He's the writer. The story was told to him by a friend who he was calling S, and the story was not his friend's story either. It was S's uncle's story. So you have Auster hearing from S, who heard from his uncle. And his uncle told him a story about this time he was in the war, and he was injured, and he almost lost his leg, but he didn't lose his leg. And it's like a Hollywood thing, like he's right in the nick of time when they're going to saw his leg off because he's injured, and they say, you're going to lose your leg. Like there's a bomb falls, something, he goes unconscious, he wakes up in another bed, there's like a beautiful nurse standing there, and happily ever after, he didn't lose his leg, okay? And, do you believe this, right? And the students, most of them say no, but I had this one group said, 2 of us do and 2 of us don't. I said, okay. The 2 of us who do believe it, because if it's a memory, then you'll remember it. We're talking about memory here and trauma. So if you have a memory, you're going to remember it and you're going to tell it, and so that made it truthful for the 2 students. Okay. The other 2 students said, well, if it's a traumatic memory, like he almost lost his leg, maybe he would want to they didn't use this word, but shut it out or repress it, right? Basically, they were saying. So he wouldn't remember it, so maybe he had to make up some of the details, and that's why it seems unrealistic. That he didn't remember it as it happened. Kind of thing. They really kind of didn't go that far, but that was my interpretation of what they were saying. And then I said, well, how about this? On the other side of that, PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder or syndrome. PTSD, disorder or syndrome, whatever you want to call it, is where some people can repress a traumatic memory to some extent in their daily lives, but then it always kind of comes back when you don't want to remember it, right? It's like you can't forget it. It's not that you repress it and so you can't recall it. That was what the students were saying. Or it's a memory so you can't forget it. You repress it, right, in PTSD, but then it comes back because it's in your subconscious anyway. It comes back when you're alone or you're at night, you're having a dream, you were in Vietnam and the shrapnel or whatever it is, okay. And it's like you're there again, right? It's in your brain somehow when a sound like sets it off or whatever it is. Okay, so this story is not about this, but this is about, firstly, what is the genre, right? Let me take a step back. So, trauma. Firstly, we're talking about humans who have trauma, PTSD. So you would try to repress it, but it might come back, right? Now, this character is, right, it's some kind of AI robot, something. I asked the students, they say science fiction. They get it. They say, it seems like it's science fiction. He seems to be a robot or AI, something. Yeah. So, right, he's never little, never grown. He's a machine, but he has kind of emotions and feelings, right? He's programmed this way. I'm assuming it's a he, and has a mother, right? Which is not his mother, but this woman who's taking care of him. And this again, right? How we interpret, is she doing him a favor or not by deleting the memories from his hard drive? I put it to the students this way, like if this is this robot, this AI character, robot character, whatever you want to call it, is we're a computer, and I have a Mac, and at least on the Mac, or I think there's a trash bin on a PC too, on an IBM computer. But right, you put the files in the trash, and then it's still full. You can still retrieve it, right, until you delete it for good, and then that's gone. So the memory, literally, you're freeing up memory, right? Because you get rid of a memory and you free up memory in the computer. But the other option is, before you trash it and delete it from your hard disk, which like would be, in this case, to use the metaphor, this AI robot person, you could back it up on an external drive. And that's what this, right, this gleaming object is. It's backed up the memories. So she's backing up his memories. Kindly, I guess. Or not kindly. This is what's at stake here that I want to talk about this, right? So, or occurred to me, right? So, it's backed up and it's on this external drive, which you put away in this locker, right? And she gives him the choice. It's like like almost like, God gives you the choice to recall or not recall, or something. Total Recall, and right, there's these other things in the past that have been something like this. I don't remember Total Recall that well, but with Schwarzenegger, right? But it's like this, right? So it's like, do you want to remember or not? Now, going back to PTSD and traumatic syndrome, I said to students, like, if you have a traumatic experience in your life, whatever it is, and you want to forget it, right? You want to repress it, or people tend to want to, or you have to work through it. Actually, that's right, the healthy way. You go to therapy and you work through it. Not going to go away. But wouldn't it be nice, I said, like, if you had this traumatic thing, but it's not affecting you now. It's not affecting your health now. It's not happening now. You don't need it anymore, basically. You went through it. You want to kind of get rid of that memory. Wouldn't it be nice if someone could just come along and clear you and just get rid of it? But then would you want them to save it anywhere so that you had the opportunity to go back and recall it again? Would you ever go back and recall it? The student asked, why did he put it away and never, slot it? I said, well, would you? And how many memories? You got hundreds of memories in there that were memories that he wanted to deny and not see because they were painful. So including this last one, maybe, which he can't forget because she can't clear him at the end. He knows she passed away. He knows maybe she's not the mother. But he's left with that, right? With that choice. Do we face our demons or do we hide from them? Do we, but if we kind of face them all at once, it could be overwhelming, right? If we have this kind of like store of trauma, or, and again, now I'm going to go into this Eastern philosophy way of thinking, which I don't think Evenson necessarily was thinking this way. He's more, I think, his background tends to be more in the sort of Western philosophical tradition, but like the Eastern way of looking at it would be like your karma, right? And it could even go back to past lives kind of thing, or in the Western sense, like a Jung would talk about or something, collective unconscious, or you have from ancestors, right? Your bloodline, that you inherit things, right? You inherit like disease. You can inherit like maybe it's everyone had cancer and you get cancer, or like this, like a physical thing, but also, a mental thing, or a mental or a disease that affects, right, your personality in some way, or is something that's in you that wasn't like, you don't identify with it as you, but it becomes you because you've inherited somehow. So it's like this, right? So he's got the hard drive there, the external drive filled with these memories, and they're all unpleasant things. And I said to the student, would you slot it? It's like curiosity killed the cat, right? So it's like, how do I know whether I want to know? How do I know whether I want to know if I don't know what's in the thing? But if she's telling him that he didn't want to know 100 some times or hundreds of times, you're going to, slot that, and suddenly you're like overwhelmed with like this barrage of traumas and nightmares that you have to face. Maybe it would be healthier to face, but this is a robot AI, who knows? But see, isn't this, it's dealing with memory. And now I'm going to talk more specifically about, I mentioned J. Krishnamurti. This is my reflection. Again, I don't think Evenson necessarily, I don't know if he's even read J. Krishnamurti or not, but I listened to his talks a lot, and I've read some of his books as well, but or parts of things. Basically, I listened to the talks. A lot of the books are actually transcriptions or things he wrote that are, similar. But anyway, when he talks about memory, he says that what are we, firstly? And this goes back to identity, which this very much deals with. White Square deals with, Kafka deals with, Abbe Kobo, all the authors I like also deal with these things. I think one of the reasons I connected with Evenson's work from the very first was this. Here we have a robot and AI. This is another topic that I haven't gotten into, right? AI and how that's coming and so on. But, and when I interviewed Evenson, we did talk about this a bit, and he talked about his thoughts about AI and robots and the difference between like Asimov and, like the way that he's portraying them here and that kind of thing. But anyway, and Japanese version too, we talked a little bit, animation and stuff. And in the 80s and 90s and Akira and all that stuff. But anyway, so what did I want to say here? Because I'm starting to lose my own train of thought. Memory and J. Krishnamurti. Krishnamurti says, what are we? Humans, right? So not AI, but humans. What are humans? And he suggests that we're basically a collection of memories. And some of those memories maybe before he doesn't go into it so much, but again, Eastern way of thinking, right? If you have karma, you have stuff from your ancestors, from your parents, things when you're in the womb, even they say, right? You're picking up subliminally. So all these memories, they're things we've been told, taught, and things we've experienced and we remember in some way, or we've repressed it somewhere. Collective unconscious, you can get into Jung, all these other things, archetypes, whatever. But we have memories. We're a bundle of memories. And I said to my students today, like, if, let's say, you're like this computer, robot, whatever, and someone has cleared you of the bad memories you don't like, and it's in this thing, if you don't slot it again, I asked them, I said, well, what happens if you like, or let's say like all the memories are in there, good and bad, and then, so you save it to the external drive, and then you clear the trash bin on your computer, which is your internal hard drive, right? And then they're gone from your consciousness, they're only external. Are you still you? Where have you gone without the memories? Are you still there? And I use the example, I said, like, let's say you liked strawberries before, will you still like strawberries? Or did you like strawberries before because of a memory you had of liking the taste of strawberries as a kid? And so when you taste it now, it's good. I give an example. I hated ikura, which is like these little fish egg things that you bite into them in sushi, right? Ikura, right? and it kind of pops and this like salty liquid shoots in your mouth. And I didn't like it. I didn't like the flavor, and I didn't like and then one year I went to a Hokkaido fair in Fukuoka where I was living at the department store, and the person I was with at the time was like, you got to try it. It's actually really good from Hokkaido. Okay, I'll try anything once. I kind of like, and then I liked it because I liked it. It was really fresh and it was good. I was like, oh, this is different than what I use. So then my idea, my memory of what ikura is and tastes like changed. So then the next time I was offered ikura, oh, maybe I'll try it. And then it wasn't bad. So see, that changed the memory. But if I had, let's say that moment was then, right, cleared, it was cleared. And then, do I go back to not liking ikura, or maybe I do like ikura because I don't remember the earlier memory. And so how far back does that go? And what are we if not a bundle of memories, And so Krishnamurti says we're a bundle of memories, and like, is this even useful? And like, and this gets grim for some people maybe, but like before you die or something, like, do you really want to take that with you? Like, is it helping us, or do we want to just sort of neutralize, in a way? Which doesn't mean to become empty-headed or this, but just that, what is consciousness? Is it just memory? Is it just good memory, bad memory, right? We still, there was a recent talk that came up in my feed with Krishnamurti about like the son, your son's died, and you put the photo on the stand, in the frame on your stand. And so you look at it every single day and you're reminding yourself of this memory, but it's not helping you to live in the now, to remember this, right? So like positive, negative, what are we if not a bundle of memories? What is memory? What is time? Who are we? What are we? And this is an AI, a robot asking this very same questions because it has consciousness, singularity, I guess, in that sense, right? That it's who am I? Where did I begin? I was never little, and I never get old, but yet there's some movement of time. There's memories, accumulation of memories, and now at the end, this robot AI has the memory of the mother, but only for a very short time, or the drift, but only for a very short time. But then at the end, finally, I become an adult because it or he is experiencing it firsthand in the now. That's kind of Buddhist too, or, because I come from a kind of Eastern way of thinking, like a lot of the books and philosophy I've read just tends to be on that side of things. I've read, Nietzsche and Schopenhauer and Jung and those guys too. Those are some of the main that I like. And Joseph Campbell, who's, talks about Eastern and Western religion and myths and things. These kinds of Western peoples, work. But Krishnamurti, by the way, if you don't know who he is, those of you watching J. Krishnamurti, the name sounds like Krishna, right? Like you think he's going to be this religious guru. He's the anti-guru guru. He calls all of it malarkey. He's basically anti-establishment, anti-religion, anti-all of it. Not anti, it just, he says, it's like memory or these things. What are we? Who are we? We need to just have a blank slate in the sense that, we're just filled with memories and teachings, and this is good and that's bad. And what about, how do we observe without the filters? That's what Krishnamurti talks about. So if you got rid of the memories and you slotted it and you saved it on an external drive and you didn't, maybe it's not a bad thing, because maybe then you can just like find yourself in there without the memories, maybe that would actually help to clear them away. Although some would say, well, you're running away, you have to go to therapy for 20 years and, sit on somebody's couch. I mean, that's what Freud would have said, but, or it's all sexuality, right? There's actually not much of that here in this story. At least not obviously or on the outside. But I don't think, I haven't really thought about that. I don't think so. But there's right, he doesn't want to remember the bitter memories of the chef dying, for example, right? Who's the chef, the student asked. Why is the chef's name coming up? Well, right, it's implied that there was a chef, and then she pulled that memory out because it was too painful. Maybe the chef died. So, or maybe it was a tragic death. Maybe he got pulled into the drift or something. We don't know. Those are one of those, holes in the text that great authors always tend to do. And Evenson's one of these authors, like Kafka, like Borges, like Auster. Auster talked about that in an interview I showed my students recently, how he says, I know some really great writers that just write too much, they don't leave enough space, kind of thing. So, So that was one main thing I want to talk about in terms of interpretation. Think about memory and, of course, identity. Who am I? And another student made a very clever comment, I thought, about the title, Never Little, Never Old, that at the end says I'm an adult. Maybe now the irony of the title is, right, was never little, never old. Throughout the story, this AI robot, I'll call it him, the protagonist, was dependent on the mother figure, the woman, to, well, I had a bad, I hurt myself, please make my boo-boo better, right? So I have a bad memory, please delete that for me. Okay, yes. And she was doing that for him, and she was, it's like, your mom makes your lunch every day or whatever, but she gets, the irony here, right, is she's getting older, so he has to take care of her physically. He's strong. He can carry her and feed her and do these things and bring her to the drift. But in fact, she is still like a mother figure, and she's treating him like a child, right? She, at that one point, pats him on the head. Oh, you forgot because I cleared you. I took all the nasties away. So the student said, well, never little, never old. But at the end, finally, the irony is that maybe he becomes an adult. He grows up. So he's overcoming that label, in a sense. And that although he is timeless, or it, or whatever, the AI doesn't have the childhood and just forever and ever going to be alone in the drift, in the now. And again, this kind of Buddhist thing too, right? There's only the now. There's no past, there's no future. This is a very Buddhist idea, Hindu idea. And so in the now, in the eternal now, in this moment, without the memories, except for the recent ones, he's creating the new ones and accumulating. And that's karma, in Eastern sense, because karma is action, or karma is, memory can be a kind of, it's like what you do and what you accumulate is karma, right? So even if you're alone and you're just staring at the drift, in this case. So he became a kind of adult, i.e. he's not a child, he's not dependent on her to clear away the bad memories, and has to take responsibility in the present moment, because there's no one around to help. There's no other humans. There's no other robots apparently in this world. There's just the drift. It's like Cormac McCarthy's The Road, when the father dies and the kid's on his own, except he's kind of adopted by the family at the end, and there's nobody to adopt this AI, and this AI isn't even human and doesn't even know what it is, but knows that it's not the same, but knows that also at the same time it has emotions, it has consciousness, it has singularity, and at the end locks that memory chip away, or a gleaming object. And so plus minus good bad, is that a responsible thing to do? Is that an irresponsible thing to do? Does it mean, is it running away? Like if you have trauma, but then would it be a good thing? Like if you have PTSD and you could get rid of the trauma, would it be good to take it on again and then, and then go to therapy for 20 years? Does that make you like a stronger person? Like we think, right, in our culture that, face the demons, that's going to make you better, but sometimes you face the demons and they overwhelm you, right? Or Nietzsche, for example, talking about Western philosophers, he kind of went crazy, right? Schopenhauer was kind of miserable, although he was, he was pretty much hated everybody, but was kind of brilliant too. Think about others like Tesla died alone, right? Kind of thing. I don't know that he was miserable, but certainly not happy, but that's different than facing the demons. But or Dostoevsky is another one. And Kafka kind of too, right? I mean, they're like all kind of teetering on the edge. You face the demons and sometimes it can push you over the edge. You may be smart, you may be strong in some ways within yourself, but still there's that possibility that it could just push you over. So if he slotted that thing and there's like 100+ memories in there, or 300 or 500, I don't know how many, that thing could have just overwhelmed this AI. But then can the AI commit suicide even? That's, the text doesn't tell us that, we don't know. Because what is AI and what are we, right? We know that humans live and die, and we're little and we get old, and the AI is never little, never old, but can it commit suicide? It doesn't need to eat or sleep. Maybe it can never die, and maybe that's a curse. In the news you see there was this guy try to be like, immortal kind of thing. And that goes back to ancient Taoism. Just speaking of the Eastern stuff, again, in China, these hermits, they go into the mountains and they try to obtain immortality, the elixirs and things. And some of the elixirs actually killed them because they were poison. but they try to, through chi practice, energy practice in the mountains stuff, and they'd live to be 110 or 20 or whatever the lore says, maybe, true or not, but they would die. So, but would it be a blessing or a curse to live forever, Especially in this world with the drift, it's like pretty much a post-apocalyptic thing. Evenson's written about that before. There's another, I didn't mention that, I did a paper on, if I can remember the title of it. Was it Immobility? And that's like the person carrying another person on the back too. Interesting, that the same kind of image as this, and it's like a post-apocalyptic world. It's very much compared to The Road and McCarthy and that one. It's a little bit more science fiction elements to it though. So these are some thoughts I have on this. There's a lot more could be said, right? So I think it does deal with identity and memory and what are we, who are we, and would it be a curse or a blessing or a curse to know? It's like you open Pandora's box and then it overtakes you. Having knowledge is not always the best, right? But then there's, the flip is like Bowie's, I think of this song, Earthlings on Fire from 97. I don't want knowledge, I want certainty. It's a bit different, but it's like, but then is knowledge always good? I mean, the more knowledge you have, the more depressed and crazy you could be, like Nietzsche, like Schopenhauer. And the fewer friends you'll have too, perhaps, possibly, unless you're good at navigating that world. Some of us are better at that than others. So, and that's also maybe a choice, but that's going off into another topic. So this was my reading and my analysis, kind of, just scratching the surface here, actually, this story. But Evenson is like this. It's, it's entertaining and it's, but it's also very thought-provoking. And again, he has a PhD in philosophy as well as literature. So that's definitely in there. And so I had a chance to talk about J. Krishnamurti, which I'm not sure. Maybe Brian, if you're watching this, maybe he'll go and read Krishnamurti now. I don't know. But about on memory, right? Quite interesting. It was a lot of fun. Thanks. It's over an hour. And that's my introduction and my reading and my little few words on that. And like I say, maybe I'll do another one by Brian. And also I want to do others too. I want to do Auster and I want to do Milhauser. I don't know. Maybe I'll do the ones I'm teaching, Shirley Jackson. And I want to talk about Bowie and dystopia because I'm doing a class on that now, which is different than the Bowie class I did before. So I'll do a talk on that at some point. So some of these a little bit more academic or literary things, and Bowie is bridging, right, between his music lyrics and 1984, for example, right? We know Diamond Dogs and some other things I'll talk about there. Evenson's also a Bowie fan. We're all Bowie fans. Okay, that's good enough for now tonight. Thank you very much, and thanks for being with me on this channel. See you the next time. I'm not going to talk about music. That's where I'll end. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining me about Brian Evenson, Never Little, Never Old, from the Good Night, Sleep Tight, I believe the collection title. It's a great collection, by the way. Thanks very much. See you next time, and be well.